latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I am Amitabh. Revi. Joining us from Connecticut is our guest today, Dr. Anwar ul-Haq Ahady. He is a board member, one of the 4 board members of the US set up $3.5 billion Afghan Fund. Dr. Ahady joins us from Connecticut. He also has been the central bank governor for Afghanistan. He's been the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Commerce and Industries. He's run for the presidential elections as well. Dr. Ahady, thank you so much for giving us time, and good morning to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning to you. Well, must be good evening there.
That's true. Dr. Ahady, if the US and other countries, mostly Western, seized or froze Afghan Central Bank reserves and funds when the Taliban took over on the 15th of August 2021. Explain the rationale of the US set up Afghan Fund for $3.5 billion. They are actually $7 billion, I think, that the American Department of Treasury had frozen.
Well, as you know, there were $7 billion that belonged to the Afghan Central Bank, DAB, the Afghanistan Bank, that were deposited with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. There were some claims against those assets by the victims of 9/11, the families of people who died in 9/11. So there are lawsuits against these assets in the courts. The plaintiffs, they have claimed that Taliban were involved in that operation, and since now they are in charge, will these assets belong to the Taliban, which is really, in my opinion, a baseless assertion. Nevertheless, that's what is pending in the courts. I think last February, the President of the United States decided to keep $3.5 billion and make it dependent on the rulings of the courts. But the other $3.5 billion, those were sort of free to be used for other purposes. So there were discussions, and since this money really belongs to the Central Bank of Afghanistan, that's the capital of Afghanistan, of the Central Bank, and there were some points raised that these 3.5 billion, even though right now they are free, but there could be some additional claims against these. So we thought that maybe a safer place would be to deposit this money with the BIC, Bank for International Settlement, in Swiss. And that's the rationale for establishing the Afghanistan Fund, the Afghan Fund. I guess the Swiss law required that it would have to be some kind of an institution so that they could accept that deposit. So we followed their law, and that's what has happened for the establishment of that fund. And the objective of the fund is really to preserve and protect those assets. So in case the situation becomes normal, then the Afghanistan Central Bank will have a capital to work with. But in some exceptional cases, maybe some state expenditures can be paid from this fund, but that will have to be decided. I think just 2-3 days ago, they decided, the Central Bank of Afghanistan decided to print some new banknotes, and initially there was a willingness on the part of this fund that in case the Central Bank of Afghanistan does not have adequate amount of money to pay for the cost of printing, that we could use this money, part of this money, to pay for that. But as I understand, actually the Central Bank has paid that money, and so we don't have to pay that money. But similar expenditures that are necessary and that are important for the well-being of the people of Afghanistan, the fund will be willing to consider those expenses, to pay those expenses. But primarily, really, it's to preserve and protect these assets so that in a normal situation, the Central Bank of Afghanistan will have adequate capital. I cannot hear you. Hello.
Dr. Ahady, I'll get into more details about both the Board of Trustees and when you can use these funds or when you can decide to use these funds. But the Taliban itself has rejected the fund because they had no involvement in either the setting up or the rules of disbursement of the fund. So how does that work if it is to help the Afghan people, as you said, to protect and preserve their capital?
Yes, they have not officially accepted it, but it's will be helpful to them. I mean, those expenses that if they don't want us to pay for those expenses, well, it will not be paid. But in case they want to pay, then it will help them. Even if they don't cooperate at all, we will be still able to achieve our main objective, and that is to preserve and protect these assets. And we will be working.
Right. As you have said, the US is still having talks with the Taliban at various levels. In Doha, they just had one. But it seems unlikely that a fund of just 3.5 billion can pressurize the Taliban to change policy, say when it comes to women, girls, inclusivity, or any other of the demands that the international community is making. That's not the purpose of this fund, is it?
Well, it could be. It could be. We hope that these pressures would motivate Taliban to bring about some changes that are desired by the Afghans, that are demanded by the international community, and that is good for any for any society that can be for the sustainability of any society to be good. But as I said earlier, even if they don't accept, still we will have this fund. It will be protected, it will be preserved, and hopefully it will be enlarged. And I'm hopeful that someday, if not in the next few days or a few months, that eventually there will be some sort of normalization of situation in Afghanistan, and then we will have this fund to be available to the central bank to use it as its capital.
Sure. One of the motives could possibly be you would, if all four of you agree, that is to stabilize, say, the currency or the macroeconomic situation. In that light, I want to ask you, Dr. Ahady, just a few days back, of course, India has started what it calls its technical mission, which is actually reopening its embassy in June this year. So we have diplomats there. Our charge d'affaires of this so-called technical team met with the acting governor of the Afghanistan Bank, which he used to run at one point of time. And the press release that came out from DAB said they discussed cooperation, technical cooperation. How do you your thoughts on how a country like India could help in the current situation, Dr. Ahady?
Well, from a technical point of view, India is, of course, in a position to help Afghanistan and probably many other countries. When I was governor of the Central Bank, I had technicians from India that were helping us. I had an advisor from India that was helping me, and I think they could do the same thing with the Taliban. As you know. There were thoughts that Taliban would be very much dependent on Pakistan, and I don't know whether this would be really appreciated by Pakistan or not. But it could be a sign of their less dependence on other countries, or trying to balance things between different countries. It's a significant statement on their part, but I think it could help them. I hope it's a well thought out statement, and one of the conditions that the United States has put on Taliban is to have professional staff in the central bank, and that this money should not be used for to help terrorism or terrorists in this regard. And the third condition, I think, is to have more professional leadership there. Well, at least the two. The first two conditions should not be really that difficult to satisfy, and I have no reason to believe that they will not do that to have some professionals. So in this regard, I think the Indian technical teams could help them, and I don't think that they will consider that to be any sort of threat to them. So probably they'll be more accepting if they have this kind of a technical assistance available to them, which the Afghanistan Bank used to have that technical assistance for quite a few years. Even when I left, they still had some people, some technicians helping the central bank.
Sure, understood. The stability of the Afghani debts to international organizations like the World Bank, the ADB, so that aid can continue to flow to Afghanistan. New notes you mentioned, which is a huge problem for the common citizen, all those torn notes that even we witnessed. You were seeing pictures that we shot in Kabul in August. Even possibility of electricity dues, right? What can the fund be used for over and above preserving it?
Well, I think you mentioned them all pretty much. Those things that are necessary and that affect the ordinary life of the citizens. You mentioned the banknotes. Well, as I said, they have already paid for that, so we don't have to use the funds from the Afghanistan Fund to pay for that, but we would have been willing to do that. I think that they are also short of passports. And we have said that we could pay for that expense as well. Well, they are they still have to pay some amount to the imported electricity before imported electricity. That's the one time. I think in principle we have accepted that we will consider that also paying for that. But primarily, really, our objective is preserve that capital and not to spend too much of that capital. But if it's if they can give us a good rationale for it, I think we will be able to consider those arguments that they present and decide accordingly. Now there are like 4 people that will have to decide on this, and the decision will have to be unanimous. So it's very conservative in that sense, that the chances of things being or projects or expenses being approved is not all that great, especially new ones. But the ones that I mentioned and the one that you mentioned, those we have had discussed them, and in principle we have said that we will be willing to accept those kind of expenses.
Dr. Ahady, if you can just elaborate on that last thought that you were mentioning, your 4-member team of the trustees. One is you, there's another member who was part, I think, of the Council of the Afghanistan Bank, who's also based in the US, one US State Department representative, and one person from the Swiss government. So if this 4-member team, as you pointed out, has to operate by consensus, in effect, even if one disagrees, it's a veto.
Yes. Institutions that are run by vetoes, they usually are not terribly active. But sure. I think this was it was considered, and it was thought that this might be a better alternative.
And when you say you want to protect and preserve this fund as the Afghan people's capital, how much would, say, you be willing to run down from 3.5 billion for all the other issues that you mentioned could possibly be paid for in terms of expenditures?
Well, we don't have a percentage assigned to it, and but it cannot be. I mean, it's not going to be used for humanitarian assistance. Unless again it's a case that is extraordinarily necessary, or will not be used for developmental purposes. Some people have argued that they have developmental projects and we should finance those. Of course, this is the central bank capital will not be used for that purpose. And we are hoping that this will generate income. We will be investing it, and safe investment. And that it will generate enough income, and maybe we can pay from that income the certain expenses that are considered to be absolutely necessary. So we have not specified a certain percentage of the funds that can be spent on necessary expenses, but I would say probably not a huge amount or a huge percentage.
Sure. And as you said, this fund is not for humanitarian or development work, but you mentioned earlier that India has been involved in technical cooperation with the Afghanistan Bank in the past, and we saw what happened a couple of days back. In light of that, Dr. Ahady, a question from one of our viewers, Jaydeep Gadavi, who says, can India take a governing role in directing international humanitarian aid? Will countries like China and Pakistan, which already have their missions, India also has one, in Kabul, provide their nod to India's financial leadership, or is that too much of geopolitics involved there?
Well, that issue has very little relevance to the fund, so it's not for us to decide as to whether India can do that or not. I mean, that's for the Indian authorities and the Afghan authorities to decide on that matter. But and let me not speculate as to whether that's.
Yeah. Not speculate, Dr. Ahady, but can I ask you for your assessment of the Afghan economy currently? I mean, there's 4 decades of war, of conflict. There are natural disasters also, apart from man-made drought, flood, earthquake. Then there are sanctions. And the figures for the economy that we are seeing, and even what we saw firsthand in August, are quite dismal.
Yes. I mean, the figures I have seen is that cumulatively since, in 2021 and 2022, there has been a contraction of almost 40% of the economy. That is absolutely disastrous, in any scale that you would look at it. Unemployment has, I think, except for the agricultural sector, where in villages it's a subsistence level operation. All other sectors have been hurt terribly. Unemployment has increased tremendously, and now they're talking about the poverty level of 95, 97%. They're talking about 21 million people needing serious assistance for food. And also there's the flight of capital. The sanctions have also hurt trading, exports and imports. Our banks cannot operate, cannot issue LCs, and they have serious problems there. And also there is I think lack of confidence in the future of the country and also future of the economy. So it's not a good situation, and this is on top of the fact that Afghanistan's economy was heavily dependent on foreign assistance, when we were supposed to receive substantial amount of foreign assistance till 2024. Well, that is gone. I mean, if everything else were okay, still the loss of public assistance or official assistance would have been a huge blow to the Afghan economy. Now that public assistance has been withdrawn, and there's been sanctions, and there's a flight of capital, professionals have left the country. So you can see that it's a really a very difficult situation. I mean, the World Bank has put this figure of 40%. But if you ask the people, they might even tell you that probably it's even worse than the 40% that the World Bank has said. So, we always say this is the worst situation, but as we go, we find even worse than the worst situation. So it's truly is from an economic point of view, it's a terrible situation for the Afghan people.
And if, like you're saying, everything is true in terms of overseas aid being, the tap being completely shut off, why is the Afghan currency still so stable? It's what today was around 87, which is close to what even the rupee is to the dollar.
Well, I think the main reason is that there's still some humanitarian assistance is going to the country. And I think there was a time that some of these international agencies, they wanted to give dollars to people instead of Afghanis. And they asked my opinion, and I told them that it will have a terrible impact on the national currency. So I asked them that maybe they should continue just exchanging dollars for Afghani and using Afghani to provide assistance to people. Afghani is the national currency. As I understand, every week, every month, I think there are like $40 million go to Afghanistan in humanitarian assistance. And in my estimate, probably it's more than that because just the US provided more than $1.1 billion in a year. And the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank has provided a similar amount. So probably it's even larger than that. I think that's the main reason why the Afghani has maintained its exchange rate. So there is still dollars available. And as you know that Afghanis are short in the sense that these are the old banknotes. With the introduction of new banknotes, I hope that they would just replace the old banknotes. If they were just to add this to money supply, then I think probably will have a negative impact on the exchange rate. But as I understand that probably they'll replace the old banknotes with these new ones and that the money supply will remain the same. I think in this regard, the central bank would need technical advice. And I hope they do have people to advise them, about money supply and the impact that it may have on foreign exchange rate.
Dr. Ahady, the Afghan Fund based in Switzerland with the BIS is $3.5 billion. As you mentioned earlier in our discussion, there's another $3.5 billion that the American president has put aside because of the 9/11 victims and what's happening in court there. Question from Jaideep again. What about those funds that the US diverted potentially for 9/11 victims in the US courts? Could that fund that belongs to the Afghan people actually come back to it at some point of time, or will that again be years at least?
Well, I would hope so. As I said, I think the claims of the victims of 9/11, those are superfluous claims. This money had nothing to do with the Taliban. We had these reserves and some of the gold that we had in New York, that was even sent to the beginning of World War II. When I left the central bank, we had about $3 billion in reserves. And, now before the Taliban took over, we had more than $9 billion in reserves. Of course, that's not something that the Taliban brought or that belongs to them. It belongs to the state. And the state is for the people. So I don't know. Those are superfluous claims. It's just that the defendant, the Taliban, were not in the court. And the U.S. law, I think, when the defendant is not there to contest the claim of the plaintiff, in that case, they go along with the claim of the plaintiff. If there were a competent lawyer, most probably that will not happen. As a matter of fact, more than a month ago, one of the magistrate courts decided that this money that the victims of 9/11, the families of victims of 9/11, that are not entitled to get this money. This money really belongs to the people of Afghanistan, and it should be returned to them. But there are other courts, and of course there are appeals, and we hope that eventually all the courts will agree that this money does not belong to anyone but the Afghan state and to the Central Bank of Afghanistan, and should be returned there. But that's to be seen as to what will happen. We hope that there will be adequate representation in courts from the Afghan side. And there are some people who are doing that on their own, but I think it needs a better coordination.
As you said, Dr. Ahady, we've all seen the numbers for the Afghan economy post 15th of August 2021, and on the ground, the situation. But what is your assessment of how the Taliban is doing with the economy, with development? Where are they getting their revenue from? We've seen the claims for their figures.
Well, I think mostly it's from the customs that they are getting, and they are claiming that they are doing, they're processing customs much better than it used to be. I don't know, but that's the claim that they have. Recently, I think they have found another good source of income, and that's selling coal to Pakistan. And the price has gone up substantially, and the export has increased substantially. I mean, a few months ago, there was a big debate about these issues. So it's possible that there are reports that they are sending like 15,000 tons per day, and and they're charging like $200 per ton. I calculated it was a substantial amount. So that could help them. But also at the same time, their expenses have gone down. They are not. We used to have huge expenses, like about $4 billion for our security forces. I'm not sure that they're spending even a few $100 million on their security forces. They are also not paying salaries of retirees, and they have laid off lots of people, and the teachers are complaining that they are not receiving salaries. So their expenses have gone down, and their revenues have gone down, but in some areas revenues have gone up, and they are managing. They are just surviving, I think, financially. And so it's a difficult situation for anyone to manage.
Dr. Anwar ul-Haq. Ahady, thank you so much for giving us time on StratNews Global and sharing your experience and expertise, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thanks to all our viewers who picked up this live stream, and thanks to all those viewers who can watch this later on our YouTube channel. You can, of course, log on to all our social media handles, including our Telegram channel, get the latest when we put up articles on our website or videos like this on our YouTube channel. You can also help us support us. There's a QR code, a UPI code that has been flashing on your screen through this interview, and the description is also given in the YouTube descriptor. That's the Support You QR code. You've been watching The Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi.